Oh, welcome back to my little corner, Emily's Corner, reading Pride and Prejudice. Last time I did talk about TikTok, and I do want to say I have never felt more seen by an app than when I was on TikTok. I don't want to downplay TikTok and its impact because it's surely, I've learned so much on TikTok. I know I didn't mean to sound like I was bashing anything or anybody last time. Because yeah, I did like TikTok, but it's just so easy to get on. I mean, it's just so easy to get on any social media. And I'm trying to use social media for good. Just downloading meditations and using it for good. Not to say that any other way is bad. I feel like when you say stuff now, it has to come with like a disclosure. What's it? A disclaimer. A disclaimer. I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings. I don't want to talk bad about TikTok, and I don't want to say anything that anybody's going to get upset about. Just like Elizabeth, I'm trying to please everyone. But yeah, not that YouTube is any better than TikTok by any means. It's just more caterable. That's not true either. There's only so many apps I can doom scroll on, so I just choose one, and I'm a millennial, so I choose YouTube, and other millennials have other choices. But our number one choice seems to be YouTube. I used to watch, before I got on TikTok, I used to watch like TikTok reels of videos of TikTok reels on YouTube. And my Gen Z friends made fun of me. And you know what? It is what it is. And we're just going to move on, and we're going to stick to this. We're going to stick to Pride and Prejudice. We're going to stick to Regency era. There's no social media back then. Or I wonder if they did have. Ooh, that's why I liked Bridgerton so much. It was almost like they were bringing social media to this era. I know that was like more Victorian era, I think. Than Regency, Bridgerton. Let's just fact check real quick. I know it's a made up world, Bridgerton. Great music. I should just start watching it again. I wonder when the new season's coming out. Bridgerton, such a good show. I don't care what anybody else says. Bridgerton era. I know it's fake. I know it is fake. This is the Regency era. Well, get out of town. Well, what's her face is being a little Jane Austenite, doing like, oh, that's fun. That makes me like it even more. I haven't watched it in a really long time, and I forgot, Lady Whistledown. Lady Whistledown. Fun. Lady Whistledown is like a little Jane Austen, like making satire on the whole thing and like making fun of the Queen and stuff. That's cool. I'm gonna have to watch it again. It's fake. I know it's fake. I know it is fake. Oh yeah, daughter of George, the King George. It was a Georgian era. Okay. Okay. I should know. Okay. Regency era, Bridgerton, Jane Austen, fake. Also fake but real. Satire, fake. Fake satire, real satire. Chapter 29. It really feels like math every time I see 4 letters that represent a number. So every time I have to say the word for XXIX, I'm going to have to go, it's 29. Poop out the numbers out your mouth. Okay. Mr. Collins's triumph in consequence of his invitation was complete. The power of displaying the grandeur of his patroness to his wondering visitors, and of letting them see her civility towards himself and his wife, was exactly what he had wished for. Mr. Collins is in love with Lady Catherine de Bourgh. I mean, is absolutely enamored with this woman. And that an opportunity of doing it should be given so soon was such an instance of Lady Catherine's condescension, which I know now what that means, which is great. Ability to like talk to lower class, even though you're super high class. Whoa. as he knew not how to admire enough. He doesn't know how to admire enough. I confess, said he, that I should not have been at all surprised by her ladyship's asking us on Sunday to drink tea and spend the evening at Rosings. I rather expected from my knowledge of her affability that it would happen, but who could have foreseen such an attention as this? He's so excited. Who could have imagined that we should receive an invitation to dine there? An invitation, moreover, including the whole party, so immediately after your arrival. I am less surprised. I am the less surprised at what has happened, replied Sir William. He's trying on the voice. From what that knowledge of what the manners of the great really are, which my situation in life has allowed me to require about the court, such instances of elegant breeding are not uncommon. Breeding. Was that a pretty knightly voice? I don't know. Sir William Knight. He was a knight. Sir William? We gotta stop talking about breeding. I get it, though. I mean, why did they talk about breeding so much? Is it just because... Why do they use the word breeding? Ugh. Good social background and good manners. Yuck. Old English. Oh, the word breed comes from the Old English bredan, which means to bring young to birth, but also cherish, which is how most people feel about their offspring. Aw. But the fact is that breeding is reproducing. It sounds like cattle. It does. It just was such a common term back then, and it sounds gross to me. Okay. Scarcely anything was talked of the whole day or next morning but their visit to Rosings. Ugh. Mr. Collins was carefully instructing them in what they were to expect, that the sight of such rooms, so many servants, and so splendid a dinner might not wholly overpower them. When the ladies were separating for the toilet, he said to Elizabeth, "Do not make yourself uneasy, my dear cousin, about your apparel. Lady Catherine is far from acquiring that elegance of dress in us which becomes herself and her daughter. I would advise you to merely put on whatever of your clothes is superior to the rest. There is no occasion for anything more. Lady Catherine will not think the worse of you for being simply dressed. She likes to have the distinction of rank preserved." He said, maybe dress a little down, just to make her feel better. While they were dressing, he came 2 or 3 times to their different doors to recommend their being quick. I love this scene in the movie. He said, quickly now, quickly. He's like running with his little legs. It was really cute. As Lady Catherine very much objected to being kept waiting for dinner, such formidable accounts of ladyship and her manner of living quite frightened Maria Lucas, who had been little used to company, and she looked forward to her introduction at Rosings with as much apprehension as her father had done to his presentation at St. James. As the weather was fine, they had a pleasant walk of about half a mile across the park. Every park has its beauty and its prospects, and Elizabeth saw much to be pleased with, though she could not be in such raptures as Mr. Collins expected the scene to inspire, and was but slightly affected by his enumeration of the windows in front of the house. Is he counting the windows? I count steps. I get it. And his relation of what the glazing altogether had originally cost Sir Louis de Bourgh. Numbers, he's a numbers guy. When they ascended the steps to the hall, Maria's alarm was every moment increasing, and Sir William did not look perfectly calm. Elizabeth's courage did not fail her. I mean, she was probably laughing about it the whole time. She's like, I don't know this woman. Why are we so worried? Courage. Very cool. She had heard nothing of Lady Catherine that spoke her awful from an extraordinary talents or miraculous virtue. And the mere statelessness of money or rank she thought she could witness without trepidation. She said, I can see this without, it's fine. From the entrance hall, of which Mr. Collins pointed out, with a rapturous air, a rapturous air, the fine proportion and the finished ornaments, they followed the servants through an antechamber to the room where Lady Catherine, her daughter, and Mrs. Jenkins were sitting. Her ladyship, with great condensation, she fogged up the whole room. Wow, how do I say it now? Condescension. My brain was really stuck on that one word. Arose to receive them. And as Mrs. Collins had settled in with her husband that the office of introduction should be hers, it was performed in a proper manner, without any of those apologies and thanks which he would have thought necessary. Thank God. Not a man of brevity. In spite of having been at St. James, Sir William was so completely awed by the grandeur surrounding him that he had but just courage enough to make a very low bow. Do you guys remember in Downton Abbey when that one servant like bowed really, really low to the Queen? He did a curtsy. That was so funny. That was much more recent. But I don't know what that age is called. Was that like the industrial age? Like right before, right, like 1912? What? Sorry. Oh. They just did the golden age? What? I don't know. Age was Downton. Come on. You know what I want. Downton Abbey. There it is. Slash era? Or era? Post-Edwardian era. Huh. 1912 to 1926, because the Crawley family justice are in the post-Edwardian era. Huh. Now, I don't know anything about that. A new era. Well, post-Edwardian. Why was I asking about that? Oh, yeah. The bow. The deep, low bow. Inside his seat, a very low bow, and take his seat without saying a word. And his daughter, frightened almost out of her senses, sat on the edge of her chair and then fell off. Just kidding. Not knowing which way to look. She was like, my God. Elizabeth found herself quite equal to the scene and could observe the three ladies before her composedly. Composure, Elizabeth, thank you. Lady Catherine was a tall, large woman with strongly marked features which might once have been handsome. Her air was not conciliating. Hold on. Conciliating. No, not conciliatory. Conciliating? Stop someone from being angry or discontented. Placate, pacify. Concessions were made to conciliate the peasantry. Gain. The arts which conciliate popularity. Okay. Pacify. Keep one from being angry. What are we talking about? Placating, what's the word? Conciliate. Shuba. Her air was not conciliating. Okay, she was not trying to pacify anybody, nor was her manner of receiving them such as to make her visitors forget their inferior rank. Oh. She was not trying to, like, gain anybody's. I see. Because they're lower than her. I get it. She was not rendered formidable by silence, but whatever she said was spoken in so authoritative tone as marked her self-importance, and brought Mr. Wickham immediately to Elizabeth's mind. And from the observation of the day altogether, she believed Lady Catherine to be exactly what he represented. When, after examining the mother, in whose countenance and deportment she soon found some resemblance of Mr. Darcy, she turned her eyes on the daughter, She could almost have joined Maria's astonishment at her being so thin and small. Mr. Berg was pale and sickly. Mr. Berg, Mrs. Lady Catherine de Bourgh's daughter, Mr. Berg, got it, was pale and sickly. Her features, though not plain, were insignificant, and she spoke very little, except in a low voice, to Mrs. Jenkinson, in whose appearance there was nothing remarkable, and who was entirely engaged in listening to what she said, and placing a screen in the proper direction before her eyes. Sorry, who's Mrs. Jenkinson? Mrs. Jenkinson? Jenkinson? Pride and Prejudice. Who dat? Former governess. Oh, yeah. Her former governess. Right. Wow, she's still like hanging out. It stains that Rosie after her was complete as her companion. Oh. Jenkins is the former governess of Anne de Bourgh, Miss de Bourgh, who stayed on at Rosings after her education was complete as her companion. That's nice. I wonder if does she get paid to be a companion? She's an old woman with unmarkable appearance, and she's wholly absorbed in serving Mr. Berg and fussing over her. I wonder if she got paid. Whoa. I'd love to get paid to be somebody's companion. I'll just fuss over you. Especially exceeding into okay, here we are. Direction of her eyes. Okay. After sitting a few minutes, they were all sent to one of the windows to admire the view, Mr. Collins attending them to point out its beauties, and Lady Catherine kindly informing them that it was much better worth looking at in the summer. You've got to come back in the summer to look out these windows. The dinner was exceedingly handsome. I've never described a dinner as exceedingly handsome, and I'm going to start. This dinner was exceedingly handsome. And there were all the servants and all the articles of plate which Mr. Collins had promised. Excellent boiled potatoes. And, as he had likely foretold, he took a seat at the bottom of the table by her ladyship's desire, and looked as if he felt that life could furnish nothing greater. It is nice to have somebody around who's just like, this is great. Everything's great. This plate is great. These placemats are great. This silverware is great. These chairs are incredible. This chair is the most comfy chair I've ever sat in my whole entire life. Where did you get these chairs? I can't believe it. And that's Mr. Collins. Everybody needs a Mr. Collins around. He carved and ate and praised with delighted alacrity. Just learned that word. Thank you very much. And every dish was commended. Could you even imagine? First by him and then by Sir William. These Siete chips that you bought at the store, I can't even imagine anything better. Sir William, who was now enough recovered to echo whatever his son-in-law said, and in a manner which Elizabeth wondered Lady Catherine could bear. But Lady Catherine seemed gratified by their excessive admiration, positive reinforcement, and gave most gracious smiles, especially when any dish on the table proved a novelty to them. The party did not supply much conversation. Elizabeth was ready to speak whenever there was an opening, but she was seated between Charlotte and Mr. Berg. The former of who was engaged in listening to Lady Catherine, and the latter said not a word to her all dinner time. Great. Mrs. Jenkinson was chiefly employed in watching how little Mr. Berg ate, pressing her to try some other dish, and fearing she was indisposed. Maria thought speaking out of the question. I will absolutely not speak. I'm just going to observe. Thank you. And the gentlemen did nothing but eat and admire. This sounds like kind of a boring dinner. Okay. When the ladies returned to the drawing room, there was little to be done but to hear Lady Catherine talk, which she did without any intermission till coffee came in, delivering her opinion on every subject in so decisive a manner as proved that she was not used to having her judgment controverted. I get to speak, and nobody gets to say anything, and nobody says I'm wrong, and I'm surrounded by yes men. She inquired into Charlotte's domestic concerns familiarly and minutely. gave her a great deal of advice as to the management of them all, told her how everything ought to be regulated in so small a family as hers, and instructed her as to the care of her cows and her poultry. Elizabeth found that nothing was beneath this great lady's attention which could furnish her with an occasion of dictating to others. In the intervals of her discourse with Mr. Collins, she addressed a variety of questions to Maria and Elizabeth, but especially to the latter, of whose connections she knew at the least, and who she observed to Mrs. Collins was a very general, pretty kind of girl. She asked her at different times how many sisters she had, whether they were older or younger than herself, whether any of them were likely to be married, whether they were handsome, where they had been educated, what carriage her father kept, and what had been her mother's maiden name. Oh my God! Elizabeth felt all the impertinence of her questions, but answered them very composedly. Lady Catherine then observed, "Your father's estate is entailed to Mr. Collins, I think, for your sake," turning to Charlotte. "I am glad of it, but otherwise I see no occasion for entailing estates from the female line. It was not thought necessary in Sir Louis de Bourgh's family. Do play and sing, Miss Bennet." "A little? Oh, do you play and sing? Okay, I thought she just said, do play and sing. Do you play and sing, Miss Bennet?" "A little." "Oh, then some time or other we shall be happy to hear you. Our instrument is a capital one, probably superior to... You shall try it some day. Do your sister play and sing?" "One of them does." "Why did you not all learn? You ought all to have learned. The Miss Webbs all play, and their father has not so good an income as yours. Do you draw?" "Not at all." "What, none of you?" "Not one." "This is very strange, but I suppose you had no opportunity. Your mother should have taken you to town every spring for the benefit of the masters." "My mother would have no objection, but my father hates London." "Has your governess left you?" "We never had a governess." "No governess? How is that possible? 5 daughters brought up at home without a governess? I never heard of such a thing. Your mother must have been quite a slave to your education." Elizabeth could hardly help smiling, and she assured her that had not been the case. That's fun. "Then who taught you? Who attended you? Without a governess, you must have been neglected." "Compared with some families, I believe we were, but such of us as wished to learn never wanted the means." "We were always encouraged to read, and had all the masters that were necessary. Those who choose to be idle certainly might." Oh, so they had like masters come and teach them. We were always encouraged to read and had all the masters that were necessary. "I no doubt, but that is what a governess will prevent, and if I had known your mother I should have advised her most strenuously to engage one. I always say that nothing is to be done in education without steady and regular instruction, and nobody but a governess can give it. It is wonderful how many families I have been the means of supplying in that way. I am always glad to get a young person well placed out. 4 nieces of Mrs. Jenkinson are most delightfully situated through my means. And it was but the other day that I recommended another young person, who merely accidentally mentioned me, and the family are quite delighted with her. Mr. Collins, did I tell you of Lady Metcalfe's calling yesterday to thank me? She finds Miss Pope a treasure. Lady Catherine, she said. Said she. Said comes first. Why do I always want to say she? Lady Catherine, said she, you have given me a treasure. Are any of your younger sisters out, Miss Bennet? Yes, ma'am, all. All? What, all 5 all out at once? Very odd. And you only the second. The younger ones out before the elder ones are married. Your younger sisters must be very young. Yes, my youngest is not 16. Perhaps she is full young to be much in company, but really, ma'am, I think it would be very hard upon younger sisters that they should not have their share of society and amusement, because the elder may not have the means or inclination to marry early. The last-born has as good a right to the pleasures of youth as the first, and to keep back on such a motive, I think it would not be very likely to promote sisterly affection or delicacy of mind. Upon my word, said her ladyship, you give your opinion very decidedly for so young a person. Pray, what is your age? With 3 younger sisters grown up, replied Elizabeth, smiling, your ladyship can hardly expect me to own it. Fun scene from the movie. Judi Dench is such a queen. Fun. Lady Catherine seemed quite astonished at not receiving a direct answer, and Elizabeth suspected herself to be the first creature who had ever dared to trifle with so much dignified impertinence. You cannot be more than 20, I am sure, therefore you need not conceal your age. I am not 21. 21. When the gentlemen had joined them and tea was over, the card tables were placed. Lady Catherine, Sir William, and Mr. and Mrs. Collins sat to a quadrille. And as Miss de Bourgh chose to play at casino, the two girls had the honour of assisting Mrs. Jenkins to make up her party. Oh, of card tables. Okay. Their table was superlatively stupid. Their table was superlatively stupid. Sorry. What does that mean? Superlatively. Extra? The highest attainable, superlative. The highest attainable level or degree of something. What? Their table was superlatively stupid. The highest degree of stupid. Oh. Scarcely a syllable was uttered that did not relate to the game, except when Mrs. Jenkinson expressed her fears of Mr. Bourgh's being too hot or too cold, having too much or too little light. A great deal more passed at the other table. Lady Catherine was, generally speaking, stating the mistakes of the three others, or relating some anecdote of herself. Mr. Collins was employed in agreeing with everything her ladyship said, thanking her for every fish he won, and apologizing if he thought he won too many. Sir William did not say much. He was storing his memory with the anecdotes and noble names. When Lady Catherine and her daughter had played as long as they chose, the tables were broken up. The carriage was offered to Mrs. Collins, gratefully accepted and immediately ordered. The party then gathered round the fire to hear Lady Catherine determine what weather they were to have them on the morrow. Oh, she's a weather person too. Meteorology. The arts and meteorology. From these instructions they were summoned by the arrival of the coach, and with many speeches of thankfulness on Mr. Collins's side, yes, and many bows on Sir William's, they departed. As soon as they had driven from the door, Elizabeth was called on by her cousin to give her opinion of all that she had seen at Rosings, which, for Charlotte's sake, she made more favourable than it really was. But her recommendation, though costing her some trouble, could by no means satisfy Mr. Collins, and he was very soon obliged to take her ladyship's praise into his own hands. He said, "You're not saying enough. Tell me more how amazing it was." Wow. I'll read one more chapter because it feels like we're here in the middle. Sir William stayed on chapter 30. XXX, triple X. 30. Sir William stayed only a week at Hunsford, but his visit was long enough to convince him of his daughter's being most comfortably settled, and of her possessing such a husband and such a neighbour as were not often met with. While Sir William was with them, Mr. Collins devoted his morning to driving him out in his gig and showing him the country. Gig. Jane Austen. No, Jane Austen, not a gif. That's funny. It says gig, and I want to know what that means. I'm sure it's some kind of carriage. He travels in a gig. What is a gig? It's a carriage. Great. It's a light, two-wheeled open carriage with large wheels, a forward-facing seat, and shafts for a single horse. So many... Oh, it's like the ones with the little... A phaeton. A phaeton, gigs, and curricles. Oh, my. That's funny. Phaetons, gigs, and curricles. Oh, my. A phaeton, a coach, and a gig. Oh, it's very cute. You guys should look it up. That's very cute. Big, big wheels and just one little tiny... That's cute. I wonder if gig and gig. I wonder if, like, I'm going to the gig. Hmm. Find the word gig. Here it is. Driving him out in a gig, showing the country. But when he went away, the whole family returned to their usual employments, and Elizabeth was thankful to find that they did not see more of her cousin by the alteration, for the chief of the time between breakfast and dinner was now passed by him either at work in the garden or in reading and writing, and looking out of the window in his own book-room, which fronted the road. The room in which the lady sat was backwards. Elizabeth had at first rather wondered that Charlotte should not prefer the dining parlour for common use. It was a better-sized room, and had a more pleasant aspect. But she soon saw that her friend had an excellent reason for what she did, and Mr. Collins would undoubtedly have been much less in his own apartment had they sat in one equally lived, and she gave Charlotte credit for the arrangement. She said, this is a little secret room, and this good idea. Do you think when it said that the lady sat backwards, does that mean it was like facing the backyard? People didn't like have room. I love a room facing the backyard. From the drawing-room they could distinguish nothing in the lane, and were indebted to Mr. Collins for the knowledge of what carriages went along, and how often especially Mr. Berg drove by in her phaeton, which is also a type of carriage, which he never failed coming to inform them of, though it happened almost every day. She not unfrequently stopped at the parsonage and had a few minutes' conversation with Charlotte, but was scarcely ever prevailed upon to get out. Very few days passed in which Mr. Collins did not walk to Rosings, and not many in which his wife did not think it necessary to go likewise, until Elizabeth recollected that there might be other family livings to be disposed of. She could not understand the sacrifice of so many hours. Now and then they were honoured with a call from her ladyship, and nothing escaped her observation that was passing in the room during these visits. She examined into their employments, looked at their work, and advised them to do it differently, found fault with the arrangement of the furniture, or detected the housemaid in negligence, and if she accepted any refreshments, seemed to do it only for the sake of finding out that Mrs. Collins' joints of meat were too large for her family. Elizabeth soon perceived that though this great lady was not in commission of the peace of the country, she was most active magistrate in her own parish, the minuteness of concerns of which were carried to her by Mr. Collins, and whenever any of the cottages were disposed to be quarrelsome, disconnected, or too poor, she sallied forth into the village to settle their differences, silence their complaints, and scold them into harmony and plenty. The entertainment of dining at Rosings was repeated about twice a week, and allowing for the loss of Sir William, then there were being only one card table in the evening, every such entertainment was the counterpart of the first. Their other engagements were few, and the style of living in the neighbourhood in general was beyond Mr. Collins's reach. This, however, was no evil to Elizabeth, and upon the whole she spent time comfortably enough. There were half-hours of pleasant conversation with Charlotte, and the weather was so fine for the time of that year that she had often great enjoyment out of doors. Her favourite walk, and where she frequently went while the others were calling on Lady Catherine, was along the open grove which edged that side of the park, where there was a nice sheltered path which no one seemed to value but herself. Love that. And where she felt beyond the reach of Lady Catherine's curiosity. In this quiet way the first fortnight of her visit soon passed away. Easter was approaching, and the week preceding it was to bring an addition to the family at Rosings, which in no small circle, but to be important. Elizabeth had heard soon after the arrival that Mr. Darcy was expected there in the course of a few weeks, and though there were not many of her acquaintances whom she did not prefer, his coming would furnish one comparatively new look at in their Rosings parties, and she might be amused to see how hopeless Miss Bingley's designs on him were, by his behaviour to his cousin, for whom he was evidently destined by Lady Catherine, who talked of his coming with the greatest satisfaction, spoke of him in the terms of the highest admiration, and seemed almost angry to find that he had already been frequently seen by Miss Lucas and herself. His arrival was soon known at the parsonage, for Mr. Collins was walking the whole morning within view of the lodges opening into Hansford Lane, in order to have the earliest assurance of it. He's like a little kid. and after making his bow as the carriage turned into the park, hurried home with the great intelligence. On the following morning he hastened to Rosings to pay his respect. There were two new nephews of Lady Catherine to require them, for Mr. Darcy had brought with him Colonel Fitzwilliam, the younger son of his uncle Lord Blank. Another Lord Blank. And to the great surprise of all the party, when Mr. Collins returned, the gentleman accompanied him. Charlotte had seen them from her husband's room crossing the road, and immediately running to the other, told the girls what an honour they might expect, adding, I may thank you, Eliza, for this piece of civility. Mr. Darcy would never have come so soon to wait upon me. Ooh, Mr. Darcy's coming just to see Elizabeth. Elizabeth had scarcely time to disclaim all right to the compliment before their approach was announced by the door-bell, and shortly afterwards the three gentlemen entered the room. Colonel Fitzwilliam, who led the way, was about 30, not handsome, but in person and address most truly the gentleman. Mr. Darcy looked just as he had been used to in Hertfordshire, paid his compliments with the usual reserve to Mrs. Collins, and whatever might be his feelings toward her, met her with every appearance of composure. Elizabeth merely curtsied to him without saying a word. Colonel Fitzwilliam entered into conversation directly with the readiness and ease of a well-bred man, and talked very pleasantly, but his cousin, after having addressed a slight observation on the house and garden to Mr. Collins, sat for some time without speaking to anybody. At length, however, his civility was so far awakened as to inquire of Elizabeth after the health of her family. Everybody's asking about the health of her family. She answered him with the usual way, and after a moment's pause added, My eldest sister has been in town these 3 months. Have you never happened to see her there? She was perfectly sensible that he never had, but she wished to see whether he would betray any consciousness of what had passed between the Bingleys and Jane, and she thought he looked a little confused as he answered that he had never been so fortunate as to meet Miss Bennet. The subject was pursued no farther, and the gentlemen soon afterwards went away. This part's so fun, to see them interact again. It's fun to watch them interact. They do seem quite perfect for each other after you think about it a minute. Can't wait to come again. Happy reading!